It's time now for The Clash, in which we tackle the big topics of the day from opposing points of view. Tonight, the remarks of Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner describing her Conservative rivals as scum adds to new research from Opinium suggesting that 46% of Labour supporters would feel negatively about friends and family voting Tory, whilst only 15% of Conservatives would feel the same way about friends and family voting Labour. According to the academic Matt Goodwin, this adds to a large pile of research showing Labour voters and Remainers are consistently more likely to unfriend, not retweet and distance themselves from people on the other side of the divide. So what's the truth here? Well, to debate this, I'm delighted to welcome comedian Dave Chawner, Dr Joanna Williams, author and columnist, and my brilliant panellist for tonight's show, former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Joanna, let's start with you. Do you think that the left struggle to handle the idea that someone else has a different opinion?
Yes, I do. I don't think it was always the case. I think if you go back certainly 20, 30 years, it wasn't the case. And some of my earliest television memories are of Mary Whitehouse, for example, kind of clutching her pearls and decrying outrageous things on television. And nobody could accuse Mary Whitehouse of being on the left. But I think somehow something over the past 20, 30 years has really changed. And we've got a complete reversal of that situation now, where it does seem to be more and more often that it's the left who are intolerant of different views. It will be the left who are more likely to call for censorship, to call for something to be labelled hate speech. I think we had a very good example of this at the beginning of this week when Keir Starmer wrote a piece for The Sun newspaper. It would seem quite sensible to me that if you want to get elected, if you want to become the next Prime Minister of this country, you have to appeal to as many people as possible. So writing for one of the most widely read newspapers would seem like a very sensible thing to do. And yet it was people within his own party, people within the Labour Party, who were so outraged and said, you know, this is a terrible thing he's done. How dare he write in the Sun newspaper? So this was people like Diane Abbott. A number of high-profile Labour MPs took to Twitter to condemn Keir Starmer for putting this in an article in the Sun newspaper.
But perhaps you should say why people feel about the Sun like that. Particularly?
Oh, well, I think it's very well known. The Sun has a bad reputation, particularly in Liverpool, because of the articles, the headline, particularly the front page, that it had after the Hillsborough incident. You know, it was an outrageous front page. It was lying about the actions of the Hillsborough fans. I have to point out it wasn't just the Sun newspaper that propagated those lies at the time, and these were coming from police chiefs and from Conservative.
And it didn't stop New Labour courting the affections of Rupert Murdoch, possibly helping Labour to win 3 elections.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the bottom line is if you want to appeal to as many people within the population as possible, i.e. if you want to win an election, you have to actually communicate with people, and you can't have this attitude, well, we don't like this particular audience, because really what's being said is not we don't like the Sun, but we don't like Sun readers. We're contemptuous of these people who actually buy and read the Sun newspaper. We don't want to communicate with these people who we don't like, who we disagree with. And I think, well, the bottom line is if you take that view, you're never going to win another election.
Well, Dave, full disclosure, both you and Peter are friends of mine, and I think that you're remarkably balanced and even-handed whenever we've debated issues, even if we don't agree on certain things. But do you think that the idea of cancel culture is a leftist idea?
Absolutely not. I think it's lazy and ridiculous to tar us all with the same communist brush. And actually, if we're going to say that the left is the left cancels, let's have a look at Saudi Arabia, China, Russia. I don't think anyone's ever called them left, but they're not really that tolerant of other views, are they, really? And I actually think that, you know what, I think that generalisation, if you said all black people are intolerant of discussion, you'd be like, whoa, let's not do that. But saying that all left-wingers is ridiculous and stupid.
Although, do you think that some people on the left, and I fully respect their views. I take the view that the left are right sometimes, the right are right sometimes, which is why when it comes to the election day, I actually make my mind up how to vote when it comes to every election. I'm not tribal. I don't belong to any political cause. But other people do seem tribal, and I wonder whether there are some on the left for whom their views are a religion or an ideology.
Of course there are. There are mentalists in every...
But I'm not sure you get that on the right.
Of course you do. Of course you do. There are outliers in both parties, and I think you're absolutely right to say it's tribalism, especially in...
But are there concerted campaigns on the right to get people cancelled, to get organisations cancelled, celebrities?
I think it manifests in different ways, and I think that's a really good point, and actually I think it's much more underground. But actually, I don't think most people are on the polar ends of the extreme. I think most people are in the middle, and some people might have right-wing economic views, but then very left-wing views on, say, things like immigration. I actually think that looking at the polarisation, people love... Also going to point out, people love to say, the left do this, because people love to get angry. Because, you know what, if we didn't have that, we'd go back to complaining about the weather, and people are bored of that.
Well, perhaps this is an issue of semantics. Maybe we should talk, Peter, about the hard left, because you certainly don't belong in that constituency. You're closer to the centre ground politically within the Labour Party, which I think is a good place to be, because that's how Tony Blair achieved his remarkable electoral success. And full disclosure, I voted for him on more than one occasion for that very reason. But I wasn't having Jeremy Corbyn very much on the hard left of the party. And I wonder whether that's the issue for the left. It's the extremists at one end who are the authors of cancel culture. And I think, many within Labour feel that the Corbynites themselves were a very toxic force within the party.
Well, I think the hard left is irrelevant, and I hope it stays that way, because Labour only wins from the centre ground. But I also want to pick up on some of the other points made, which is about cancel culture. Does it come from the left and so on? I think on the right, views are shut out, but in different ways. And to go, if you like, from the grassroots to the top, think about Boris Johnson. He's, I think, had 2 rounds of cabinet appointments, and he's been quite ruthless in removing anyone who was seen as a bit Remainery. And the criticism of Boris Johnson, that he essentially had a cabinet of Brexiteer nodding dogs. So that ideological orthodoxy is at the top of government, even though one has to accept...
Jeremy Corbyn did that with the Labour Party, didn't he? I mean, he filled his shadow cabinet with the hard left and indeed effectively ethnically cleansed the parliamentary party too in their selection process.
That is completely wrong. So, first of all, when Jeremy Corbyn was elected, and remember, it was my job as a Labour geek to study the minutiae of this, they rang round the parliamentary Labour Party saying, will you serve? And they had some declines. Some people from the centre wouldn't serve in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, but some acceptances included people like Pat McFadden, who was shadow minister under Corbyn. And briefly, do you know whose boss Pat McFadden was before Jeremy Corbyn? Some guy called Tony Blair. So that showed actually there was a degree of rapprochement within the Labour Party.
The thing is, I think it's a real straw man that you're holding up there, because all governments have the right to, prime ministers have the right to pick and choose who's in their cabinet. And to me, it makes perfect common sense that you would have people who are more aligned with your way of thinking. I mean, that's because this is the government of the day. This is a cabinet that's been handpicked by Boris Johnson.
To get the job done.
To get the job done, exactly. But I think when we're talking about a general intolerance, I mean, I've worked in a university for 12 years. If you have a look at the kinds of things that go on campus, so every week, every academic year, there tends to be an Israeli apartheid week, for example, which is led by groups of academics and students who are calling for boycott, divestment of Israel. Now, those aren't right-wing students who are organising campaigns to boycott and ban lecturers from speaking on campus. If you have, who are from Israel, if you have a look at the student campaigns that are about no platforming speakers, they tend to be, more often than not, students who are associated with the political left who, I mean, at the moment, it's feminists who are at the forefront of being banned from speaking on university campuses, gender-critical feminists who happen to think that if you have a vagina, then you're a woman. That's labelled, not by people on the right, but more often than not people on the left, as being a transphobic remark to make.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because, of course, the Labour MP Rosie Duffield chose not to attend Labour Party conference this year for fears of her safety.
Absolutely.
And Laura Kunsberg, the BBC's political editor, required security 3 years ago at Labour Party conference when Jeremy Corbyn was leader. And this is a concern.
And I mean, you can see similarities. I'm not going to sit here and say it's only the left that have this problem. I mean, we know that Boris Johnson struggled also with the question of do only women have a cervix?
And he should know.
He certainly should. So, I mean, and I'm not saying that these things are exclusively, but I think that they're definitely more likely to be associated with left-wing progressive, so-called progressive.
I think you're drowning a bit under the weight of your generalisations. Don't you think universities are always going to be left-leaning to a certain extent because people's views are often different at 18 compared to be at 40 or 45?
But that might be true. But again, come back to the point I was making at the beginning. In the past, it was left-wing students who were the champions of free speech. When you look at the free speech movement that started at the University of Berkeley in the 1960s, that was left-wing students who were championing that. I was a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party when I was a university student. So, I mean, that's incredibly left-wing. You don't get much more.
You've been on a journey, haven't you, Joanna?
Well, you see, I don't necessarily think I have, because when I was a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party at university in the early 1990s, I very firmly believed in free speech then. I wasn't going around campaigning for people to be no-platformed, whereas nowadays it does tend to be the left that's championing the no-platforming. So, you see, what I'm arguing is that left-wing in the past meant let's have free speech. Left-wing today means let's shut down debate, let's stop.
That's such an enormous generalisation, and the easy way to rebut that is if the left is so keen on shutting down debate, what happens at Labour conference? We all go down to the seaside and argue with each other.
Well, no,
because we're open to debate.
That's not true, because at Labour Party conference, white people are told to shut up and be quiet.
Were you at Labour conference?
I witnessed that video.
Were you at Labour conference?
Were
you at Labour conference?
I wasn't, but I watched it.
I was.
And at one particular sitting in the hall, at the conference hall, and it was about housing, I believe, a white chair of that particular meeting said, I'm afraid to put it bluntly, there are too many white men contributing to this debate, so can you quieten down and let's hear from some other voices.
Well, I don't think you should tell people to shut up at all, but you actually played the clip earlier which showed Keir Starmer being interrupted by hecklers, and he didn't have a meltdown and he coped with it well, and it actually shows he coped with it, that the Labour Party is open to debate.
I don't think it shows the Labour Party is open to debate at all. I think it shows that
it was literally a debate.
But it was, well, it wasn't. It was people shouting from the audience. I mean, that's not my definition of a debate. I've spent all day today at the Battle of Ideas conference taking place just down the road from here in London. Now, that's a debate because you have people on the panel, you have people from the floor actually making contributions, not just people randomly shouting out insults from the audience.
Well, if we're talking about people being intolerant, I mean, like, Insulate Britain, they're very left-wing, and yet the people coming out of their cars shouting at them, they're being nasty. Whereas the people from Insulate Britain are just sitting there calmly taking it. Whereas I think the people shouting at them, they're being very nasty to them.
Actually, I think if I was stuck in an ambulance or waiting, wanting to go and visit my dying mother in hospital, and there was somebody sat in the road stopping me from getting to see my dying mother in hospital, I would be pretty angry. I would be getting out of my car. I would be shouting at those people to move out of the way. I mean, how dare they? Who do they think they are to stop people going to work?
But my point is, if you take the extremes of people like Insulate Britain and all the way through to the neo-Nazis, I don't think that actually shows your average person.
Just coming back to what Angela Rayner said, and she described her opponents as scum, as homophobic, as racist. Now, I think that it would be very surprising to hear a voice on the right make those remarks about a Labour colleague. I mean, I can't imagine it, this sort of character assassination. We've
got a Prime Minister that has made homophobic comments, and we've got a Prime Minister that's made racist comments. Now, I don't believe...
I mean, I'm never going to defend Boris Johnson for some of his journalism that is a turn-off, as far as I'm concerned. But in public discourse about your opponents, I certainly haven't heard voices on the right describe their opponents as scum.
Well, it's actually the public that Boris Johnson is insulted, not his opponents.
Well,
Piccadillys with watermelon smiles.
I've got no stomach for some of Boris's writing in the past, and
tank top bum boys was another one of his phrases.
It's pretty, it's pretty unedifying language. But the debate is about how you describe your opponents, and I just can't find too much evidence that those on the right have belittled and demeaned their colleagues in the way that someone like Angela Rayner has. Quick last word on this, Dave Chawner. What about the idea of wokeism as such, extreme political correctness, which has within it sort of cancel culture because it's about rewriting the language and getting people fired for saying the wrong thing? Even historic tweets will cause you to lose your career, even if you've tweeted as a teenager, in the case of a young English footballer back in the day. So, again, is this a left problem?
I don't think so. Again, I think we're taking it a very extreme. And as a...
But are there any woke right-wing people?
Can
you name one?
I'd have to get back to you on that. Is it? Well, actually, that's a very...
Because wokeism is sort of an idea of the hard left, and built into wokeism is cancel culture.
Yeah, but you got Snowflake and Gammon, whereas like people are actually more in the middle. And actually, I don't think people, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think people identify like all of these different kind of camps.
Yeah,
I think people are just eminently very reasonable, and actually like going down to the pub's fine. But I don't think we're going down to the pub. We're having these conversations on social media where tone, text, and speech actually aren't taken into account, which actually brings down the discourse and makes it worse.
Well, this has been excellent discourse, I've got to say. And we've destroyed the debating point because both of our lefties have been completely reasonable. I feel very uncancelled. And Joanna...
Wow, I take exception to being called reasonable.
Exactly. It's not your brand, is
No.
it? The world's gone mad. Sincere thanks to Peter Edwards, who's with us for the rest of the show. And also to Dave Chawner, top comedian, a regular here at GB News, and the brilliant author and columnist, fresh from the Battle of Ideas, Dr Joanna Williams.